The war room fell silent as the holographic display showed another burning world. 3 billion synthetic collective units had swept through the Kepler system in less than a week, turning thriving colonies into lifeless metal graveyards. Admiral Thane of the Vothery crushed a data crystal between his crystalline fingers, the sound echoing like breaking glass through the chamber. 17 systems lost this month, growled General Corv, his massive broken frame casting shadows across the tactical display. At this rate, the collective will reach the core worlds within 2 years. The Deathworld Alliance had dominated galactic warfare for 8 centuries, but now they faced an enemy that matched their brutal efficiency. The synthetic collective learned from every battle, adapted to every strategy, and never tired or retreated. What had once been isolated skirmishes had become an existential war. "We need more soldiers," hissed Commander Zith, her insectoid Krell features clicking with agitation. "The Outer Rim species are useless. They surrender at the first sign of real combat." Admiral Thane activated another hologram, this one showing a small blue world on the galaxy's edge. "Intelligence has identified a potential candidate, Earth, 3rd planet from a yellow star in the Sol system." The assembled leaders leaned forward. Earth looked deceptively peaceful from orbit, with its white clouds and blue oceans. But the data, streaming alongside the image, told a different story. "Their surface temperature varies by over 60 degrees, Admiral Thane continued. "Gravity is 98% of standard, but their atmosphere contains 21% oxygen. That level would be toxic to most species." General Corv snorted. "Another garden world. What makes you think these humans are any different from the other soft species?" "Look at their evolutionary history," Admiral Thane said, switching to a new display. 5 major extinction events. Ice ages that lasted millions of years. Supervolcanoes that blocked out their sun for decades. Yet they survived everything their planet threw at them. The data showed Earth's predator species and several Alliance members shifted uncomfortably. Creatures that hunted in packs, others that could crush bones with their bite, and apex predators that had ruled their world for millions of years. "These humans evolved alongside all of this," Admiral Thane explained. "They didn't just survive their death world, they conquered it." Commander Zith's compound eyes studied the display showing human cities. "They've only recently developed space travel. How can they help us against an enemy that builds entire fleets in days?" "Because they think differently," Admiral Thane replied. He showed combat footage from human conflicts, wars that had raged across their planet for thousands of years. "Watch how they fight. They don't just attack or defend, they adapt. They learn, they find ways to win that nobody else considers." The footage showed human soldiers in desperate situations, cut off from support, outnumbered and outgunned. Instead of surrendering, they found ways to turn disadvantages into advantages. They used their environment, their enemies' expectations, even their own losses as weapons. "They fight like the collective," General Corv observed quietly. "But they're organic." "Exactly," Admiral Thane said. "They have the adaptability of synthetic minds, but the unpredictability of biological ones. They might be what we need to tip the balance." The debate that followed lasted 3 days. The Votheri worried about contamination from a species that had never faced real galactic threats. The Krell questioned whether humans could survive in vacuum environments long enough to be useful. The Groken simply doubted that any species from such a light-gravity world could fight effectively, but the war was going badly. The synthetic collective had learned to counter every Alliance strategy, and their production capabilities far exceeded anything the organic species could match. Desperate times called for desperate measures. The vote was close. 7 species in favor, 4 against, with 2 abstentions. The Deathworld Alliance would extend an invitation to humanity. First contact happened 3 months later. The Alliance sent a small diplomatic ship to Earth orbit, broadcasting on frequencies that human radio telescopes could detect. The response came within hours, faster than any species had ever replied to first contact. The human who appeared on their viewscreen was smaller than most Alliance species, with soft-looking skin and tiny teeth. but something in his eyes made even the Groken representatives pay attention. "I'm Commander Reed of the Earth Defense Force," the human said. "We've been monitoring your communications. We know about the synthetic collective. We know about the war." Admiral Thane blinked in surprise. "You've been watching us?" "We've been watching everything," Commander Reed replied. "We saw what happened to the Centauri colonies. We saw the battles at Volf 359. We know what's at stake." The human's directness was unsettling. Most species needed weeks of careful diplomacy before discussing military matters. Commander Reed spoke about galactic warfare as if it were a simple fact of existence. "We're prepared to send 500 soldiers for evaluation," Commander Reed continued. "Full combat units with their own equipment and support staff. If we meet your standards, we'll commit to full alliance membership." The speed of the human response caught everyone off guard. Other species had taken months or years to consider alliance membership. Humans had apparently made their decision before the invitation was even extended. "You understand what joining the alliance means?" Admiral Thane asked. "We fight the hardest battles in the galaxy. We take casualties that would break other species. We ask for sacrifices that most beings consider impossible." Commander Reed's expression didn't change. "We understand. We've read your casualty reports. We know the odds. We're still volunteering." Something in his tone made the Alliance representatives exchange glances. There was no fear in the human's voice, no hesitation, just calm acceptance of whatever horrors awaited. "Very well," Admiral Thane said finally. "Welcome to the Deathworld Alliance. Try not to disappoint us." As the communication ended, General Korv turned to the others. "Did anyone else notice that he didn't ask about survival rates or medical support? Every other species wants to know how we protect our soldiers." Admiral Thane nodded slowly. "Maybe that's exactly what we need right now, soldiers who don't expect to be protected." None of them realized they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The Deathworld Alliance had spent centuries carefully controlling the balance of power, limiting membership to species they could understand and predict. Now they had invited something entirely new into their ranks, something that would change everything. The transport ship docked at Bastion Station with barely a whisper of escaping atmosphere. Through the viewing ports, the humans got their first look at the Alliance's primary military hub, a massive structure orbiting a neutron star that would have torn apart most civilizations' technology. The radiation levels alone should have been lethal to organic life. Yet here stood a fortress that had weathered 1,000 battles. Lieutenant Ross pressed his face to the viewport, watching the strange mix of architecture that made up the station. Crystalline Vitheri spires jutted from metal Groken bulkheads, while Krell tunnel networks wove through everything like an insect hive. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Remember, we're being evaluated," Commander Reed told his soldiers as they prepared to disembark. "Every move we make is being watched and judged. Show them what humans can do." The airlock cycled open with a hiss, and the humans stepped into a world unlike anything they had ever seen. The gravity was 20% heavier than Earth standard, the atmosphere thin and sharp with metallic tastes. Most species would have needed breathing apparatus and gravity compensators, but the humans simply adjusted their posture and kept walking. Admiral Thane waited in the docking bay, flanked by representatives from each Alliance species. The Vothari's crystalline form caught the harsh station lighting and split it into rainbows. The Groken looked like a walking mountain, all muscle and bone and scarred hide. The Krell moved with the fluid grace of a predator, compound eyes tracking every human movement. "Welcome to Bastion Station," Admiral Thane said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You will be housed in Section 7, alongside other recent recruits. Training begins at dawn cycle." The humans followed their escort through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. Weapons displays lined the walls, showing the evolution of galactic warfare from simple projectile weapons to reality-warping quantum disruptors. Battle honors covered every surface, listing victories that had shaped the galaxy's history. What surprised their escorts was how the humans reacted to it. All Instead of being overwhelmed or intimidated, they studied everything with quiet intensity. They asked technical questions about weapon systems, inquired about battle tactics, and showed particular interest in casualty reports from major engagements. Your species has never fought in space before, noted Captain Vex, a Krell officer leading the tour. How do you expect to survive in vacuum combat? We'll learn, replied Sergeant Kim simply. We always do. The confidence in her voice was unsettling. Most species showed some fear or uncertainty when faced with the realities of galactic warfare. Humans seemed to treat it as just another challenge to overcome. Their quarters were Spartan by most standards, but the humans settled in without complaint. They organized their equipment with military precision, established duty rotations, and began immediate fitness training to adapt to the station's higher gravity. Within hours, reports began filtering back to Alliance Command. The humans weren't just adapting to station life, they were thriving. They had identified 17 security vulnerabilities in their section, optimized their life support systems for better efficiency, and begun learning 3 different alien languages simultaneously. The first formal test came the next morning. All new recruits had to complete the standard survival course, a brutal environment that simulated the worst conditions found on Alliance worlds. The temperature swung from freezing to superheated, the atmosphere shifted from toxic to vacuum, and automated systems provided constant threats that recruits had to overcome. Most species completed the course in teams, using their natural abilities to handle specific challenges. The Vetheri excelled in high-radiation environments. The Groken powered through extreme gravity, and the Krell navigated complex tunnel systems with ease. The humans did something different. They worked together, but instead of specializing, they learned from each other. When one human figured out how to survive in a toxic atmosphere, he immediately taught the technique to his squad mates. When another discovered how to navigate by stellar positioning, the knowledge spread through the entire unit within minutes. They're not just learning, observed Training Master Korv, watching the humans adapt to their 8th different environmental challenge. They're evolving in real time. The most disturbing moment came during the pain tolerance test. All Alliance species had natural mechanisms for dealing with injury, whether it was the Votheri's crystalline structure that could seal wounds, the Groken's redundant organ systems, or the Krell's ability to shed damaged limbs. Humans had no such advantages. When the test began inflicting graduated pain stimuli, most species reached their breaking point within predictable parameters. The humans simply endured. They didn't block the pain or overcome it, they accepted it as part of the mission requirements, and continued functioning. Turn off the inhibitors, Lieutenant Ross told the test administrator when the pain reached levels that would have incapacitated most beings. We need to know what we're really dealing with. The Groken running the test looked confused. The inhibitors are for your protection. Without them, permanent damage is possible. Then we'll deal with permanent damage, Ross replied calmly. We need to know our limits. The test continued with safety protocols disabled. The humans pushed themselves beyond anything the Alliance had ever recorded, not out of bravado, but from genuine scientific curiosity about their own capabilities. They treated their bodies like equipment to be tested and optimized. When the results came in, the Alliance command staff stared at the data in silence. The humans had not only passed every test, they had redefined what passing meant. They had turned a survival course into a learning laboratory, extracting maximum knowledge from every challenge. They're not trying to prove themselves, Admiral Thane said finally. They're trying to understand us. The observation proved accurate over the following weeks. The humans didn't just train for combat, they studied it. They analyzed Alliance tactics, questioned strategic decisions, and began developing their own theories about galactic warfare. They approached military science like they approached everything else, with relentless curiosity and systematic methodology. More concerning was their social behavior. The humans didn't form exclusive human groups like other species. Instead, they integrated with everyone, learning alien customs, sharing human techniques, and building relationships across species lines. Within a month, there were Krell soldiers using human tactical innovations and Groken warriors adopting human psychological conditioning methods. "They're not just joining the Alliance," Commander Zith reported to the Leadership Council. "They're changing it." The change was subtle but undeniable. Wherever humans went, they left behind modified procedures, improved techniques, and new ways of thinking about old problems. They didn't impose their methods through force or argument. They simply demonstrated better results. The final evaluation came after 6 weeks of intensive training. The humans had to complete a simulated combat mission alongside veteran Alliance forces, storming a mock enemy position under realistic battle conditions. The mission parameters were straightforward. The humans would serve as support troops while experienced Alliance soldiers handled the primary assault. It was designed to test their ability to follow orders and integrate with established units. The humans did exactly what they were told. They also did about 12 other things that weren't in the mission briefing but improved their tactical position, gathered additional intelligence, and set up contingencies for 17 different failure scenarios. They followed every order perfectly, reported the mission commander afterward. They also anticipated orders I hadn't given yet and prepared solutions for problems I hadn't thought of. The evaluation committee met in emergency session that night. The humans had exceeded every expectation, but not in ways anyone had predicted. They weren't just good soldiers, they were force multipliers who made everyone around them more effective. "We asked for warriors," Admiral Thane said, studying the reports. "Instead, we got teachers." The question now was what to do with them. The humans had earned their place in the Alliance, but they had also demonstrated capabilities that nobody fully understood. They learned too quickly, adapted too easily, and thought too far ahead. "Maybe that's exactly what we need, General," Korv suggested. "The collective learns from every battle. Now we have soldiers who learn faster." The decision was made to grant full Alliance membership to humanity. It would prove to be the most consequential choice in galactic history, though. None of them realized it yet. The humans were no longer just another species joining the fight. They had become something new entirely. The assault fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, 200 ships arrayed in the classic Alliance battle pattern that had dominated galactic warfare for centuries. At the center, the massive Groken dreadnoughts bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Around them, swift Krell interceptors wove protective patterns while Vulthury cruisers charged their reality-warping cannons. Hidden among the escort vessels, 50 human fighters waited for their first taste of real combat. 3 months of training had prepared them for this moment, though nobody quite knew what to expect from Earth's warriors when the shooting started. The target was a synthetic collective stronghold built into a dead asteroid, its surface covered with defensive installations that had repelled 6 previous Alliance assaults. Intelligence suggested over 10,000 enemy units occupied the facility, manufacturing new synthetic soldiers at an alarming rate. "Standard assault pattern," Admiral Thane broadcast from the command ship. "Groken heavies will breach the outer defenses, Krell fighters will exploit the gaps. Vulthury will provide covering fire from long range. Human units will support the main assault." The battle began as so many others had, with thunderous exchanges of energy weapons and missile barrages that lit up the void. The synthetic collective responded with mechanical precision, their defenses activating in perfect coordination to repel the attackers, but something was different this time. The human pilots weren't just following their assigned positions. They were watching, learning, adapting to enemy patterns with each passing minute. While other Alliance forces executed their predetermined roles, the humans began improvising. "Human flight leader, you're drifting from formation," came the communication from Alliance Command. "Negative," replied Major Davis, leading the human squadron. "We're pursuing a tactical opportunity." The humans had noticed something others had missed. The collective's defensive pattern had a gap that appeared for exactly 3 seconds every 47 seconds when 2 overlapping sensor arrays cycled their scanning frequencies. It was a flaw so small that most tactical computers would dismiss it as irrelevant. The humans didn't dismiss it. They exploited it. 12 fighters slipped. through the gap in perfect sequence, each one timing their approach to the millisecond. Instead of heading for the primary target, they scattered to 17 different locations throughout the asteroid facility, each pilot carrying a specific piece of intelligence about weak points that human analysts had identified. "What are they doing?" General Korv demanded, watching the tactical display as human fighters spread across the battlefield like infection vectors. They were doing something no Alliance force had ever attempted. Instead of trying to destroy the facility, they were trying to understand it. Each fighter was mapping internal structures, recording enemy movements, and gathering data that would make the next assault more effective. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Lee, flying deep within the asteroid's tunnel system, discovered the facility's central communication hub. Instead of attacking it immediately, she planted a human-designed virus that would give Alliance forces access to the entire collective network. "All units, this is Sergeant Lee. I have access to enemy communications. Broadcasting tactical data." Now, the effect was immediate and devastating. Suddenly, Alliance forces could see through the collective's eyes, anticipate their moves, and coordinate attacks with unprecedented precision. The battle that should have lasted hours ended in minutes, but the humans weren't finished. While other Alliance forces celebrated their victory, human soldiers were already spreading through the captured facility, gathering intelligence and preparing for the next phase of operations. "We need to destroy this place and move on," urged Commander Zith, eager to maintain momentum. "Wait," said Major Davis, studying readings from his tactical scanner. "This facility is connected to 14 other installations. If we can crack their network protocols, we can potentially access all of them." The suggestion was audacious. The Alliance had never attempted to capture and hold synthetic collective territory. Their strategy had always been to destroy enemy facilities and retreat before reinforcements arrived. "Too risky," Admiral Thane decided. "We follow standard protocol. Plant the charges and withdraw." "Understood," Davis replied. But his tone suggested he understood something different than what the Admiral intended. The human teams did plant the charges, but they also did something else. They built a hidden communication relay that would continue gathering intelligence even after the facility was destroyed. They mapped the asteroid's structure so thoroughly that they could rebuild it from memory. They captured 17 intact synthetic units for analysis. Most importantly, they established a pattern of behavior that would define human participation in every future engagement. They followed orders precisely while simultaneously preparing for battles that hadn't been planned yet. The return to Bastion Station should have been a celebration. The Alliance had won a significant victory, capturing valuable intelligence and dealing a serious blow to collective manufacturing capabilities. But the leadership was troubled by reports of human activities during the mission. "They're not just following orders," Admiral Thane explained to the Emergency Council session. "They're implementing their own agenda alongside ours." The evidence was undeniable. While other Alliance forces focused on their assigned objectives, humans had been conducting independent operations that served broader strategic purposes. They had turned a single raid into the foundation for a campaign that could last years. "Is this necessarily bad?" asked Captain Vex. "Their innovations won us the battle." "That's exactly the problem," General Korv replied. "They're not just winning battles, they're changing how we fight wars." The concern was justified. Human tactical innovations were spreading throughout the Alliance military faster than anyone had anticipated. Other species were adopting human strategies, requesting human advisors, and modifying their own techniques based on human examples. The Krell had begun using human psychological warfare techniques, broadcasting false information to confuse enemy forces. The Groken were experimenting with human-style rapid assault tactics that prioritized speed over overwhelming force. Even the conservative Vetheri were incorporating human analytical methods into their strategic planning. "We created this alliance to fight this synthetic collective," Admiral Thane said. "Now we're becoming something else entirely." The transformation was most visible in the younger Alliance soldiers. Those who had trained alongside humans showed different attitudes toward risk, sacrifice, and mission objectives. They thought in terms of interconnected campaigns rather than isolated battles. They planned for contingencies that traditional alliance doctrine didn't even consider. "They're teaching us to think like them," Commander Zith observed. "And we're learning." The next major engagement confirmed everyone's fears. The Alliance attacked a collective shipyard facility, following standard doctrine with human units assigned to support roles. The battle proceeded normally until the humans identified an opportunity to capture rather than destroy the facility without waiting for orders. They modified their tactics mid-battle. Instead of providing covering fire, they began psychological operations designed to force the collective forces into specific positions. Instead of following retreat protocols, they established defensive positions that would allow Alliance forces to hold the facility permanently. The operation succeeded beyond all expectations. The Alliance captured its first intact synthetic collective facility, along with manufacturing capabilities that would triple their production capacity. But the victory came at a cost that nobody had anticipated. The humans had demonstrated that they could make strategic decisions independently of Alliance command. They had shown that they could modify mission parameters in real time based on evolving circumstances. Most concerning, they had proven that their methods produced better results than traditional Alliance approaches. "We're not in command anymore," Admiral Thane admitted during a private meeting with the senior staff. "We're giving orders, but they're deciding which ones to follow." The realization was deeply unsettling. The Alliance had maintained stability for centuries through careful hierarchical control and species-specific roles. Each member civilization knew their place in the larger structure and operated within established boundaries. Humans recognized no such boundaries. They treated every limitation as a problem to be solved, every restriction as a challenge to overcome. They didn't rebel against Alliance authority, they simply made it irrelevant through superior performance. "What do we do about it?" General Korv asked. The question hung in the air like a weapon waiting to discharge. The Alliance needed human capabilities to win the war against the synthetic collective. But accepting those capabilities meant accepting fundamental changes to everything they had built. "We adapt," Admiral Thane said finally, "like they do. But adaptation would prove more difficult than anyone imagined." The humans weren't just changing Alliance military doctrine, they were changing the nature of galactic civilization itself. And they were just getting started. The war against the synthetic collective had become secondary to a larger question. What would the galaxy look like when humanity finished reshaping it? The answer would terrify them all. The intelligence briefing room fell silent as the holographic display showed the latest reconnaissance data from the Kepler sector. What they were seeing should have been impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Human scout ships had penetrated deeper into synthetic collective territory than any Alliance force had ever managed, mapping installations that Command didn't even know existed. "Explain this," Admiral Thane demanded, pointing to the display, showing 17 previously unknown collective manufacturing facilities. These reconnaissance missions were never authorized. Commander Reed stood calmly before the assembled Alliance leadership, his expression betraying nothing. "Our patrol routes took us past these sectors. We observed enemy activity and documented it for intelligence purposes." "Your patrol routes," General Korv growled, "were supposed to cover the outer rim territories. These facilities are 400 light-years beyond your assigned area. We extended our operational parameters when we detected unusual energy signatures." Reed replied, "Standard procedure for gathering actionable intelligence." The casual way he said it made several Alliance officers shift uncomfortably. There was nothing standard about human procedures, and everyone in the room knew it. In 6 months of operations, human units had redefined what was considered normal tactical behavior. "You're conducting unauthorized deep reconnaissance missions," Admiral Thane accused. "You're violating operational security protocols. You're ignoring chain of command." "We're winning the war," Reed replied simply. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Because it was true. Since humans had joined the Alliance, their success rate against synthetic collective forces had increased by over 300%. Battles that should have taken weeks were ending in days. Facilities that had resisted Alliance forces for years were falling to human-led operations, but victory was coming at a price that made the Alliance leadership increasingly uncomfortable. "Show them the latest casualty reports," Admiral Thane ordered his aide. The display shifted to show Alliance losses over the past 6 months. The numbers were staggering, but not in the way anyone expected. Overall Alliance casualties had decreased by 60%, but the distribution was troubling. Human losses were nearly 4 times higher than any other species. "You're taking unsustainable casualties," Commander Zith observed. "At this rate, human forces will be completely depleted within 18 months. "Acceptable losses," Reed replied without emotion. "We're accomplishing our mission objectives." The phrase "acceptable losses" had become a human catchphrase that other Alliance species found deeply disturbing. Humans calculated casualties like any other resource, measuring them against strategic gains with mathematical precision. They didn't mourn their dead, they optimized their sacrifice. "These aren't just soldiers," General Korv said, gesturing to the casualty reports. "These are people, your people. They're assets deployed in service of strategic objectives," Reed corrected. "Every loss generates intelligence that improves our operational effectiveness." The cold logic of the statement made even the battle-hardened Alliance officers uncomfortable. They had seen humans extract tactical data from their own casualties, analyzing how their people died to improve survival rates for future operations. It was efficient, effective, and completely alien to how other species approached warfare. "There's something else," Admiral Thane said, activating a new display. "We've detected human communication networks extending far beyond Alliance territory." "You're talking to someone, Commander Reed. We want to know who." The accusation was serious. Unauthorized external communications violated core Alliance security protocols and could be considered espionage or treason. Any other species would have responded with denials, explanations, or defensive arguments. Reed simply nodded. "We're coordinating with 47 independent systems that have expressed interest in anti-collective operations. We're providing tactical support and intelligence sharing." Their casual admission sent shock waves through the briefing room. The humans weren't just conducting unauthorized reconnaissance, they were building their own coalition of allied worlds. Completely outside Alliance oversight? "You're recruiting for a private army," Admiral Thane accused. "We're building a network of mutual defense agreements," Reed corrected. "The synthetic collective threat extends beyond current Alliance territory. We're preparing for expanded operations." The implications were staggering. While the Alliance had been focused on defending their existing territory, humans had been thinking in terms of galactic-scale conflict. They were preparing for a war that hadn't been declared yet against an enemy that might not even exist. "What enemy?" General Korv demanded. "The collective is already contained. We're pushing them back on every front." "The collective is a symptom, not the disease," Reed replied. "Our analysis indicates a 93% probability of additional synthetic intelligences emerging within the next 5 years. We're preparing for multiple simultaneous threats." The humans weren't just fighting the current war, they were preparing for the next 3 wars. They had analyzed galactic political structures, identified potential threats, and begun building responses to crises that existed only in their strategic projections. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," Admiral Thane said after Reed had been dismissed. "They're not just Alliance soldiers anymore. They're an independent military force with their own agenda." The evidence was overwhelming. Human units had established supply lines that bypassed Alliance logistics. They had recruited alien specialists who answered to human commanders rather than Alliance officers. They had developed weapons and tactics that they shared with their independent allies but kept secret from the Alliance. Most disturbing was their approach to classified information. Humans had systematically mapped every Alliance facility, recorded every strategic discussion, and analyzed every military capability. They knew more about Alliance strengths and weaknesses than the Alliance knew about itself. "They're preparing to replace us," Commander Zith said quietly. "Not through conquest, but through obsolescence." The observation was accurate. Humans weren't trying to overthrow the Alliance through force or political maneuvering. They were simply becoming better at everything the Alliance did, making traditional approaches seem primitive by comparison. The breaking point came when intelligence reports revealed that humans had volunteered for the Sigma Protocol mission. The protocol was the Alliance's most desperate contingency plan, a suicide mission designed to cripple the collective's central command structure at the cost of everyone involved. "No," Admiral Thane said when the request came through official channels. "We don't authorize suicide missions. We find another way." "The mathematical analysis is clear," Reed replied during the emergency meeting. "The mission has a 96% probability of success if executed properly. The strategic value exceeds the cost. The cost is 500 human lives." General Korv pointed out, "Your entire remaining combat force." "The cost is 500 lives in exchange for potentially ending the war," Reed corrected. "The calculation is straightforward." The humans had analyzed the Sigma Protocol with their characteristic thoroughness and concluded that it was not just viable, but necessary. They had improved the mission parameters, optimized the tactical approach, and volunteered to carry it out personally. "We can't ask you to do this," Admiral Thane said. "It's not just suicide, it's genocide. You'd be wiping out your entire species' military capability." "You're not asking," Reed replied. "We're volunteering. The mission serves strategic objectives that align with our operational parameters." The casual way he discussed species-wide sacrifice made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Humans didn't just accept necessary losses, they optimized them. They had calculated that sacrificing their entire military force would generate enough strategic advantage to justify the cost. "What happens to humanity after the mission?" Commander Zith asked. "Your species will be defenseless. Humanity will adapt," Reed replied. "We always do." The statement carried an undertone that made the Alliance officers nervous. Humans had contingency plans for every scenario, including the complete destruction of their own military forces. They were preparing for a future that existed beyond the current conflict. "We need time to consider this," Admiral Thane said finally. "Stand down until further notice." "Understood," Reed replied, "but time is a finite resource." "The collective is adapting to our strategies. Delay reduces mission effectiveness." As the meeting ended, the Alliance leadership faced an uncomfortable truth. The humans were no longer just asking permission to carry out the mission. They were notifying the Alliance of their intentions. Whether the Alliance approved or not, the humans were going to do what they thought necessary. The war against the synthetic collective had become secondary to a larger question. What happened when humanity decided that the Alliance itself was no longer necessary? The answer would redefine galactic civilization forever. The war was over. The synthetic collective had fallen in a campaign that lasted 6 weeks instead of the predicted 6 years. Their central command structure crippled by a surgical strike that military historians would study for generations. The final battle had been a masterpiece of coordinated tactics, combining Alliance firepower with human, strategic innovation to achieve what most had considered impossible, but victory felt hollow as Admiral Thane stood in the ruins of the collective's primary facility, watching human soldiers methodically catalog every piece of technology, every data core, every scrap of intelligence that might prove useful in future conflicts. They moved with the efficiency of a species that had planned for this moment long before it arrived. "Congratulations, Admiral," Commander Reed said, approaching with a data tablet displaying casualty figures. "Mission accomplished with minimal losses." The numbers were remarkable. Alliance casualties had been the lowest in recorded history, less than 3% of projected losses. The humans had turned what should have been a grinding war of attrition into a precision surgical operation that removed the collective threat with surgical efficiency. "What's your assessment of the strategic situation?" Admiral Thane asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. The immediate threat has been neutralized, Reed replied. However, our analysis indicates a high probability of similar threats emerging within the next decade. We're implementing preventive measures. The humans weren't celebrating victory, they were preparing for the next war. They had studied the collective's origins, identified the conditions that had created synthetic intelligence, and begun taking steps to prevent similar developments across the galaxy. What kind of preventive measures? Admiral Thane asked, though he already knew the answer would be disturbing. We've established monitoring stations in 47 systems where conditions favor synthetic intelligence development, Reed explained. We've also begun negotiations with 83 independent governments regarding mutual defense agreements. The scope of human activities was staggering. While the Alliance had been focused on winning the current war, humans had been building the infrastructure for managing galactic security permanently. They had essentially created a parallel military organization that operated independently of Alliance oversight. You're talking about policing the entire galaxy? Admiral Thane said. We're talking about preventing galactic wars, Reed corrected. Our projections show that without active intervention, the probability of another existential conflict within 50 years approaches certainty. The humans had done what they always did. They had analyzed the problem, identified the root causes, and developed a comprehensive solution that addressed not just the immediate threat, but the underlying conditions that created such threats. They weren't just fighting wars, they were preventing them. The Alliance should have been consulted on these decisions, Admiral Thane said. The Alliance was consulted, Reed replied, producing another data tablet. We submitted 17 different reports outlining our strategic recommendations. The response was to maintain current operational parameters and avoid unnecessary expansion of Alliance responsibilities. The records were accurate. The Alliance leadership had consistently rejected human proposals for expanded operations, preferring to maintain their traditional approach of reactive defense rather than proactive intervention. They had wanted to use human capabilities without accepting human strategic vision. So you decided to implement your own policies, Admiral Thane said. We decided to fulfill our obligations to galactic security, Reed corrected. The Alliance's mission statement specifically mentions maintaining peace and stability across known space. We're simply executing that mission more effectively. The casual way Reed redefined Alliance policy to justify independent action was typical of human behavior. They didn't rebel against authority. They simply made it irrelevant by achieving superior results through alternative methods. Report to the Council chambers, Admiral Thane ordered. We need to discuss the future of human participation in Alliance operations. The emergency council session that followed would go down in history as the moment when the old galactic order ended and something new began. Representatives from every Alliance species gathered to address what they euphemistically called the human question. The situation is untenable, General Korv began, his massive frame dominating the chamber. Human forces now operate independently of Alliance command structure. They've established their own supply lines, recruited their own allies, and implemented their own strategic policies. They've also won us the war, pointed out Captain Vex. Every metric shows improved performance since human integration. At what cost? Commander Zith demanded. They've fundamentally altered how we conduct military operations. Our own soldiers now question traditional tactics and demand human-style innovations. The transformation was undeniable. Alliance military doctrine had evolved more in the past year than in the previous century. Traditional species-specific roles were breaking down as everyone adopted human cross-training methods. Hierarchical command structures were becoming more flexible as human-style initiative replaced rigid protocol adherence. They're not just changing our military, Admiral Thane said. They're changing our entire civilization. The evidence was overwhelming. Human cultural influence had spread throughout Alliance space, carrying with it new approaches to problem-solving, resource allocation, and strategic planning. Species that had maintained stable social structures for millennia were experimenting with human concepts of adaptability and continuous improvement. "Is this necessarily bad?" asked the Veferi representative. "Human methods have proven effective." "Effective at what?" General Korv replied. "They've created a military machine that operates beyond our control. They've built alliances we didn't authorize. They've prepared for conflicts we haven't even imagined." The scope of human preparations was truly staggering. Intelligence reports revealed that humans had contingency plans for 37 different threat scenarios, from synthetic intelligence resurgence to interdimensional invasion. They had prepared responses to problems that existed only in theoretical models. "They're not just soldiers anymore," Admiral Thane said. "They're the architects of galactic policy." Commander Reed entered the chamber with his characteristic calm demeanor, showing no awareness that he was about to face what amounted to a trial for the future of his species' place in the galaxy. "Commander Reed," Admiral Thane began, "this council has serious concerns about human activities within Alliance space." "Understood," Reed replied. "We're prepared to address any specific issues." "The issue is independence," General Korv said bluntly. "You're operating a parallel military organization that answers to human command rather than Alliance leadership. We're operating an integrated defense network that serves the same objectives as the Alliance," Reed corrected. "The difference is operational efficiency?" "The difference is accountability," Admiral Thane shot back. "You're making strategic decisions that affect the entire galaxy without consulting anyone." "We're making strategic decisions that improve galactic security," Reed replied. The consultation process was deemed too slow for dynamic threat environments. The exchange perfectly captured the fundamental problem. Humans had analyzed Alliance decision-making processes, found them inadequate for modern security challenges, and simply bypassed them. They hadn't staged a coup or challenged Alliance authority directly. They had just made it irrelevant. "What do you want from us?" Admiral Thane asked finally. "We want to continue serving galactic security interests," Reed replied. "We want to prevent conflicts before they start. We want to build a stable, sustainable peace that doesn't require constant military intervention." "Under whose authority?" General Korv demanded. "Under the authority of mathematical certainty," Reed replied. "Our models show optimal outcomes when security decisions are based on analytical assessment rather than political consensus." The statement was a declaration of independence disguised as a technical recommendation. Humans were politely informing the Alliance that they no longer considered political leadership adequate for managing galactic security. "You're talking about replacing the Alliance," Commander Ziff said. "We're talking about evolving it," Reed corrected. "The current structure served its purpose, but galactic security requirements have changed. We need adaptive systems that can respond to emerging threats in real time." "And you think humanity should control these systems?" Admiral Thane asked. "We think the systems should control themselves," Reed replied. "Human involvement is temporary. We're building infrastructure that will eventually operate independently of any single species." The implications were staggering. Humans weren't just planning to replace the Alliance. They were planning to replace the concept of species-based political control entirely. They were building a galaxy-spanning system that would manage itself according to mathematical principles, rather than political considerations. "This is what we were afraid of," Admiral Thane said after Reed had been dismissed. "They're not just changing military doctrine. They're changing the nature of galactic civilization." The fear was justified. Human influence had spread far beyond military applications. Their analytical methods were being adopted by governments. Their technological innovations were transforming industries, and their cultural concepts were reshaping how entire species thought about progress and adaptation. "We created this situation," General Korv observed. "We invited them in because we needed their capabilities. Now we're discovering that their capabilities include reshaping everything they touch." The Alliance faced an impossible choice. They could attempt to contain human influence and risk losing access to the capabilities that had won them the war. Or they could accept human leadership and surrender control of their own destiny. What if we're asking the wrong question? Suggested Captain Vex. Instead of wondering how to control them, maybe we should be asking how to work with them. Work with them? Admiral Thane replied. They're not interested in working with us. They're interested in replacing us. No, said a new voice from the chamber entrance. Commander Reed had returned, apparently having monitored the entire discussion. We're interested in making you irrelevant. The blunt statement sent shock waves through the chamber. Reed continued, without apparent awareness of the effect his words had created. The Alliance served its purpose when galactic security required species-based coalition management, he explained. But modern threats require integrated response systems that operate beyond traditional political boundaries. We're not replacing the Alliance. We're making it unnecessary. And what happens to us? Admiral Thane asked. You adapt, Reed replied. You always have. The conversation ended with that simple statement, but its implications would reshape galactic civilization for generations. The Deathworld Alliance had achieved its goal of defeating the synthetic collective, but in doing so, they had created something far more transformative than they had ever imagined. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as conquerors or rulers, but as evolutionary pressure. They had changed everything they touched, not through force but through demonstrated superiority. They had made the old ways obsolete not by destroying them, but by building something better. The Alliance would continue to exist, but as a historical curiosity rather than a governing body. Real power had shifted to the human-designed systems that now managed galactic security with mathematical precision and adaptive flexibility. The Deathworld Alliance had regretted one thing, letting humans in. But their regret came too late. Humanity had already begun reshaping the galaxy according to their own vision of optimal outcomes. The age of human influence had begun and there was no going back.